what we challenge, and if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samueli. With me today, of course, is co-founder of the Gaggle, Peter Lavelle, and it is now 10 a.m. on the East Coast of the United States, which can only mean one thing. And all of America is agog, waiting for the start of our joint weekly live stream. So how are you, Peter?
Good. We had a horrific weather yesterday, and the weather's recovered. It's very sunny, a little too humid for me, but it's a nice, bright, sunny, warm day. And
Sunny.
and to put that into focus, everybody, Moscow gets about 53 to 58 days of sunshine a year. So when the sun is out, we enjoy it.
Well, that's the thing. And like we were talking yesterday, and I think with Mark Sloboda, and he was complaining about the heat. And I understand when people complain about the heat, but my feeling is always, enjoy it while you have it, and particularly if you're living in Moscow, because it's going to be cold soon enough, really cold. So, hey, it's hot for a few days in the year. Just
now, when people complain in the summer, I just say that's taboo. You shouldn't do that.
Yeah, exactly.
You really shouldn't be complaining about summer. Okay,
Right.
Really, you shouldn't.
Yeah, it's like
But
complaining.
but having said that, it's almost kind of taboo to talk about the winter too, because what do you expect? We're here.
No, that's true.
Why people moved into the forest in this part of the world is a mystery to me, but they did. Okay, and they
That's
stayed.
what it is. Yeah, no, that's what it is. It's true also in the United States, and all those people moved up north. Why would they do that when you can hang out in down in Florida? I mean, why go live
Oh,
in?
it's too humid. It's
Well, not
really-
everywhere. Not all of Florida is humid. Some
Yeah,
of it,
you
but
have like Gainesville up north and stuff like that,
Right.
on the Panhandle.
Right.
But the times I've been there, I just can't get used to it because your hair never. If you wash your hair, it never dries.
right. No, I think some of it is, but I think I think the parts of it are pretty nice. I think Mar-a-Lago, where Trump is, that's pretty decent.
Yeah, well, he probably has the whole place air conditioned.
Air conditioned. Yeah, that's right. But anyway, speaking of Trump, I guess the big news and the number of aspects to it is, of course, the riots that have now broken out in Los Angeles, and seemingly, we'll see, are going to try and spread to other parts of the United States in a wonderful recollection. Oh, it's now almost 5 years since the summer of George Floyd. In fact, it's just a little more than 5 years. And of course, the objective is the same. I mean, the objective is to effect a color revolution. Now, in 2020, the objective was to secure Trump's defeat in November, and that succeeded. Trump looked weak. Trump looked ineffectual. It always happens if you're the government and there are riots, and the government doesn't seem to be, even though it's supposed to be the city government or state governments that are supposed to handle riots, not really the federal government. But either way, it's the president who is seen to be weak and ineffectual.
Well, particularly since
our mission was accomplished.
Particularly since the Trump administration criticized governors and how they conducted their COVID policy, is that they should be fall in line with the administration. And then when you have the riots, he kind of flipped it. Well, this is not my responsibility. This is the government. It didn't work. The messaging fell apart very badly. It's very interesting to me. I watched some of the live coverage last night and this morning, Moscow time. I don't know, maybe I'll get your thoughts on this, George, but this was supposed to be. This is kabuki theater on both sides. Both sides were looking for to be able to show they are predominant, that their narrative is rising to the top in the ascendancy. It looks like both sides were spoiling for a fight for me. Okay, because I've said all along about this whole immigration thing, and my issues with it, but. Is anybody surprised that we've gotten to this point?
Right, okay? But you can't. Yes, but that's why I don't really see the symmetry between the two sides. I mean, after all, the one side is in the business of enforcement of the law, which is what Trump is trying to do. I mean, the problem that you have had with
Well, I
immigration
mean,
is that,
they're not deporting as many people as you would think. Okay,
well, that's what they're trying to do. Yes, but they're trying to do it now.
this is
So
their
when they try,
hang
first,
on,
when
hang
they
on.
don't do it, then they get
This
attacked
is
for.
their flagship issue, and they want to show that they're
Yeah, but
enacting. Okay,
that's fine.
and let me give the symmetry, and you can disagree. Is that the Democrats, the liberals, are so flat on their back right now, and how to deal with Trump, and now they need to show some kind of a public disaffection, go in the streets, blow up a few cars, thing like this is this and this is really pathetic because that's the only thing they have. They continue to sink in the polls. There may be dissatisfaction with Trump, but the left has no alternative for them. And now we have this spectacle. We're having a
Well,
politics
it's much more
spectacle.
than that. Much more than that. That's why I don't agree. It's much more than a spectacle. It's essentially an attempt to sabotage the administration. You remember they already tried to do that in the courts with these judges. Essentially, with whatever Trump did, a judge somewhere would declare, no, no, you can't do it. Boom, and therefore you are then tied up in the courts in perpetuity, because by the time it reaches the Supreme Court, that's going to take months and months and months.
You
During which
just said
time, of course,
something
that's one
you
thing. The second part of it is essentially you try to make the country ungovernable. You have riot after riot after riot in response to what is, after all, a legitimate governmental function, which is to enforce the laws. I mean, that's what a government's supposed to do. You're
You
supposed
said
to enforce the law.
something very key, and it's going to be, and I think it will determine how this plays out. If this spreads, okay, in the deepest of blue states, California, are you surprised? Okay, I'm not. Okay, this is something that they've been preparing for. What they want to do, they want BLM riots again. They want to just start controlling the narrative, and of course you're going to have the mainstream media following in suit. Okay, this is extremely well planned. Okay, to the point where it's almost boring. Okay, the reaction we'll see. I mean, the level of incompetency is staggering. The troops are being sent to. Troops are now in California. No, they're not. They weren't there. They're not there. They haven't been involved yet. Okay, will they? That's a different question.
That in itself is a very interesting
Just
question.
the way the
Right,
narrative is, both sides are
right,
trying.
right, right. Well, all right, but it's not both sides. I disagree. There's both sides. I
Okay,
think it's one
we can
side.
agree to disagree on that one.
We
Okay.
think to disagree because I think in this case you were right in saying, oh, there haven't been many deportations, and that is true, and therefore that has been a criticism of Trump. I mean, you've been there for all these months, and there haven't been many deportations. So now they say, well, we've got to do something about it. But the problem arose because of the Biden administration. It let in millions and millions of people. And once you let in, who knows, 10 million, 13 million, who knows? No one knows exactly how many entered the country. We don't even know how many people are illegal. I mean, at the moment, the Trump administration is trying to focus on those who came in just during the 4 years of Biden. Even before that, how many were living in the country illegally? Maybe 20 million, 30 million. Nobody really knows these numbers. But the problem is that once you have them en masse, the way that the liberals argue it, oh, well, now every single one of them is entitled to due process. Well, of course, if every one of them is entitled to due process, then essentially this is going to take 100 years because, hey, every individual goes in, he has a lawyer, there's a preliminary hearing, and there's another hearing, and then the immigration judge,
I have a,
and then it goes on. That's just one individual.
I have a completely okay. We've been over this ground before. Everybody knows it. Okay, so deporting these people, everyone's wages are going to go up. Maybe. I doubt it. Okay. I mean, again, this is just, these meta narratives out there. We're fighting back against this invasion, all that. Well, I'm against illegal immigration completely. Okay. And I told you when Trump came into office, where this is good, he's going to hang his hat on this, and this is where the polarization, where the political discourse. Meanwhile, in the big beautiful bill, the tech companies get a 10-year immunity, from oversight and all of that. Oh my goodness. Okay, I mean,
Right,
so
but
let me finish, and you can counter. So the people that are in control, that have the money, they're going to make even more money as the peasants fight each other. Time immemorial. That's the way
I,
it works.
I don't say. First of all, I think that if you do deport people, and above all, what Trump has already accomplished, which is nobody's coming in, nobody's crossing the border. That he's already accomplished that. You're going to tighten the labor market, and the
We'll
laws of
see. We'll see as
economics
automation
play
and
in.
AI take over. Okay,
Who takes over?
AI.
Yeah, okay. Well, but
Well,
okay,
come on, George.
that's a different issue about AI. I mean,
I
that's
mean,
a
it's
separate issue. But
amazing. It's
if you
amazing.
have a labor
The
market, and
tech
if
companies,
you
the tech oligarchs.
yeah,
It's
but that's
interesting
correct.
that they've kind of shifted to Trump's way of thinking. Okay, because
But
they're going to get all this preferential treatment. Okay, and they're
they're not
going to.
getting preferential.
They want to automate. They want to. Okay, sure. Jeff, Facebook isn't going to do well out of this. Okay, a lot of others will. Okay,
Musk
maybe
isn't doing
not
very
not
well.
Elon Musk now. Okay,
Musk is
but
not doing
many
well.
people will pick up the slack. Okay, we'll just see. I mean, I've always doubted that this is going to affect in a positive way the little guy, the middle class. It remains to be seen. Okay, that's all I'm saying. All right,
Right.
and
Well,
I am against illegal immigration. I'm not against deportation. Okay, I do have issues about due process. If you don't have concern about due process, then what's this all about?
but
Okay?
due process has never been. That's anybody who's in the country illegally, basically, he's eligible for deportation. Due process doesn't apply there. I mean, once you can't present papers to demonstrate that you are here legally, then that's it. You're booked on the next flight out of the country. I mean, there isn't a due process whereby you can go to an immigration judge and start making your
I
case
wish that
there
were true,
about.
George. But if you go to California, it doesn't work that way.
It doesn't work that way simply because there have been governors like Gavin Newsom and many others who have
Yeah,
played this game of sanctuary cities. So you have sanctuary cities, and people have
exactly.
illegals have moved into sanctuary cities. But you can't blame Trump for any of that. I mean, Trump is at least trying to do
Well,
something about
to,
it.
to,
I mean,
to,
I just it seems to me
I,
this
to the
this
comment, Peter, you have no idea what's actually happening in California. I lived there for over 10 years. I have a very good idea. Watching the video footage coming out of Los Angeles, I know all of those streets very, very well. So sorry.
right. So that's the thing. I think but this is exactly the legitimate function of government, which is
I'm not going to disagree with you,
yeah,
George.
exactly. You have to enforce the laws. But you see, the way that what's happening now, why I think is significant, is if you can cause enough riots, and that's the calculation. If you can cause enough disturbances, enough disorder, this will force Trump to back down. That's the calculation, and it might work. My own feeling is that if these riots continue, Trump might back down. He's done it before. He might just back down, and that's the calculation. That's why I was saying about the sort of it's the color revolution. What is behind the color revolution is to show the ineffectiveness of government. Whether it's Yanukovych or Shevardnadze or Milosevic, he's not in control anymore. The streets are in control, and once the streets are in control or seen to be in control, then the guy at the top, there's no point to him. He might as well go away. And then after Trump, if the Democrats get back in, the floodgates open up again. Boom! Another 10, 20 million
Well,
people.
I mean,
And then there'll be another Republican who'll say, well, I'm gonna do something about it. But meanwhile, you've added another 20 million illegals into the country.
see how it plays out. But as I said, George, when we started talking about this was an intentionally built powder keg, and there's no good ending to it whatsoever.
Right.
None whatsoever.
Now, the thing that is quite interesting, and this is the issue of the legal authority under which Trump is acting, because there's a lot of screaming. Oh my God, the Posse Comitatus Act. You can't have, we have the National Guard, the federal government, armed forces, law enforcement, and so on. But the funny thing was, first of all, this was done on a regular basis by Democratic presidents, and they loved it when they used essentially the Insurrection Act to federalize the National Guard to desegregate the schools in the South. I mean, Eisenhower did that, of course, in Little Rock, Arkansas, I think in 1957, to enforce a court order. He said, "Oh, I can't trust the governor Fabius of Arkansas. I can't trust him, so we're going to bring in the federal forces." That was federalizing the National Guard. He had to invoke the Insurrection Act, and no one complained. Eisenhower was a national hero. Kennedy did that also a couple of times. Desegregation of schools, because Johnson did that in 1967 in Detroit after the riots in Detroit, because Mitt Romney's dad, George Romney, he kind of lost control and asked the federal government to step in. But you can't do that unless you federalize the National Guard, and then Johnson sent in basically the National Guard to restore order in Detroit. But Trump, interestingly enough, hasn't actually done that. He hasn't invoked the Insurrection Act. He's invoked something. I've got this interesting thing here that what he has done. Let me just show this. Here is his notice and blah blah. He outlines all the numerous incidents of violence, and then he talks about this. I hereby call into federal service members the units of the National Guard under 10 USC 12406 to temporarily protect ICE and other United States government personnel who are performing federal functions, including the enforcement of federal law. So they aren't going to be involved in law enforcement. They are there to protect federal
Right.
agents. So Trump hasn't invoked the Insurrection Act. If you invoke the Insurrection Act, then you can send in the National Guard to enforce law and order. He hasn't done that. He said he's only sending them in, to protect ICE and other U.S. government personnel who are performing federal functions, including the enforcement of federal law, and to protect federal property. So then he goes on, and here the New York Times says this, and the point is that here he's not. It isn't the Insurrection Act. That's the so there's a lot of hysteria that's taking place that somehow Trump has invoked the Insurrection Act or Trump is sending in the army. He hasn't done that. It's a much more restrained
Well, I mean,
use
if I could interrupt,
than Eisenhower, than Jack Kennedy.
again, I mean, I watched coverage of it. Okay, the helicopters and the drones and all of that. Okay, it seemed to me that the sheriff's department, LAPD, the California Highway Patrol, and all the other agencies, they seem to have it pretty much under control. Okay, I don't see a national emergency here. This happens from time to time in California, and particularly in Los Angeles. It's a regular occurrence, unfortunately. Okay.
Well, I don't know. It does
I'm
look like
I'm not a judge of it. I'm just saying,
exactly.
I saw. Okay.
Yeah, but it's hard to say because, again, the
Yeah.
media are presenting it in a way that they want to show, everything is under control.
Well, no, I
but
think
the fact
usually
is
they
that
want to show everything is not in control. Okay.
but the fact is, well, the question is whether federal agents are. I mean, the question here is federal agents need to be able to do their jobs, which is what this is really all about. Are they able to carry out the tasks that are their responsibilities? In this case, with ICE and everyone else, that's the issue. And if the local police, the local authorities are not cooperating and are not helping them, then it is incumbent on the federal government to say, well, we need to protect the federal agents in order to ensure that they are doing their job. I mean, the whole thing started when they tried to secure these deportations. They started going to these places like Home Depot, which is a fount of illegals working away, and to basically deport them. And the authorities, the state, local authorities, refuse to cooperate. So it does make sense for what Trump did. But still, the question will be, I mean, obviously, Gavin Newsom and all the rest of them, Karen Bass and others, they know exactly what they've been doing all these years. They've been playing this game of encouraging illegals.
Playing this game.
Yeah,
This is what I'm saying. Yes, keep going.
right. No, they're playing this game. Why are they playing this game? Well, because they want a permanent Democratic majority in the country, and that's the game that they're playing.
No,
And
it's not really so much about immigration, is it?
no, I don't
Yes,
think so. But
I agree.
yeah, that's
Both sides are hanging their hat on this issue. Okay,
right.
no
Right, but I
surprise.
just don't see it's a both sides thing. I mean, I think one side I think is in the right, the other is in the wrong. I mean, I think
No, I'm
it's the
not talking about
responsibility
right
of the
wrong. I'm
government to
saying
ensure that illegals are
I'm looking at the political equation. I'm not saying
right.
who's right or wrong. I
Right.
think illegal immigration is wrong.
Right.
Okay,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I'm
No.
not
Listen.
against deportations. I think I've said that 2 or 3 times already.
Right.
Okay.
Well, I think so, and I think that, but where I think it's going to be the deciding factor will be, will Trump back down?
Well,
And
can I
there
interject? And you'll like what I have to say, George. Will he back down? Okay, everyone, let's zoom out. Well, how is he doing with Ukraine? How is he doing with Iran? Let's zoom right back into
right.
Southern California. That's my answer.
Right, and that's I think the problem, which was that he did kind of. I mean, he knows perfectly well. I mean, now with the experience that he's had with the summer of George Floyd, how riots kind of ensured his defeat. I mean, without that and COVID and everything else, he was cruising to a comfortable re-election.
Well, and a rigged election, George.
Oh yeah, but it was obviously a rigged election. It's a rigged election where you have again masses of illegals, and this is, of course, the favorite Democratic talking point. There is no illegal voting in America. None. No one's voting. So you have, I don't know, whatever. As I say, we don't know how many illegals there are.
It would almost be satisfying in a weird way that illegals did vote. I don't think anyone voted. I just think a lot of ballots were out there. If you
Well, I
see
think a
what
lot of that's true.
I don't
mean,
think illegals tipped the election. Okay, okay.
no,
I
but
don't.
you would have
I
to.
don't
But
see
you
any
have
evidence
to.
of it. I do see these drop boxes. I
Well, the
see
drop, all that is true. That's true. However, I mean, you have to use a little bit of common sense and say, well, look, if you have all these illegals who have fake social security numbers, have fake state ID numbers, have fake driving licenses, fake their way into jobs. They have to lie in order to get a job. Why wouldn't they fake their way into voting? I mean, so no, that they would never do. They would never. Oh, that never. Yes. Do they have a fake ID? Yes. Do they have a fake social security number? Yes. Fake driving license? Yes. But no, no one would
All
ever
right. I mean,
do anything like that.
because of the very nature of illegal immigration, we can't really pin something like that down. Did illegals vote in the election? I'm pretty sure of that. Okay.
Right.
To what degree? And did it make a
Well,
difference?
nobody
Different
nobody
area.
knows.
Yeah, I'm agreeing. We don't know.
Yeah.
We don't know.
One of the reasons why people always say it's very small. Oh, it's very tiny. But the only reason they say that is they only count those cases where somebody is actually caught, prosecuted, tried, and convicted, and then say, oh, that's the only case of an illegal voting. You say, yeah, but that's just one of the ones.
Yeah.
The only crimes that
But-
are committed
but-
are the ones where the perpetrator is caught, convicted, sentenced to
Okay,
prison.
well,
That's the only crimes that are committed.
Why do you have to go through all that if you can just stuff the ballot box?
Yeah, you can know that. That's
I think that's what 2020 was all about.
right. No, I agree. I agree. I don't think. I mean, I think that was made the biggest difference. But there's no question that the Democrats have been playing this the game of hey, securing a road to citizenship. That's the expression they use. You're securing a road to citizenship.
Okay, but
Amnesty.
you already said it, George, is to be able to create a permanent majority.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
this is not, they don't. I don't think they give a hoot one way or another about immigrants. But if
No,
they can, if that is part of their building process for a permanent blue majority,
Right.
yeah, But they
Right.
do a lot of other things too. Okay.
That's true. No, I think that's true. And of course, there are the corporate interests, and the Democratic Party and the corporate interests are very much on the same page. So, like Gavin Newsom, or his corporate friends, they want the cheap labor. They've always wanted the cheap labor.
A
And
lot of Republicans want the same labor,
who
George.
is it? Republic? Yeah, no. I mean, I think it's
See, that's it.
definitely
Again, this
there's
is
definitely a
politics.
yeah. That's always been the
I
case.
mean,
Yeah,
this is inhumane. This is not who we are. I'm so sick and tired
right,
of that. What do you mean it's not who we are? Why don't you treat the people that live there, that were born there, why don't you treat them well? Is
right, right.
that who you are?
No, I think
They don't have
that's
any
right.
value for human life. They don't have any value for people that work. No.
No,
This is a charade. It splits my head when I listen to these people talk this mumbo jumbo.
yeah, it's definitely, but that's they've been playing this the cheap labor lobby, of course, very powerful in Europe, and why are they doing it? They're doing it because it's a way of keeping inflation down. I mean, basically, all of the governments are basically running inflationary economies. They're always basically printing money, and how do you control inflation in those circumstances? Well, you can raise interest rates, but that can be painful because that can bring on a depression. The most effective way of controlling inflation is by having a permanent pool of fresh labor, and that keeps driving down wages. The guy who's his Joe, what's Powell, Jerome Powell, the Fed chair, he blurted this out. He blurted this out, one day, that hey, this is how we control inflation, by constant flow of migrants. And so there's always the powerful interest, and it's very interesting that these magazines like The Economist and the Financial Times are enraged that Trump is trying to do something about it. You can't, no, they all deserve their day in court. 40 million or whatever. Every single one of them deserves his day in court. No, they can't remove anyone because they're terrified of anything that's going to put a dampener on the constant flow of cheap labor.
I don't know.
Um,
It's very interesting. You said at the very, very beginning, and I agree with you completely, because I see this as a strategy. And if if it's going to go up the coast to Oregon and Washington, something in Texas, which can go either way, we'll see where it goes. But this is obviously a test for the Trump administration, and you know, uh, you know, no offense to the MAGA world, but I don't see your guy getting a lot of real wins. Okay. I mean, George and I are ecstatic seeing parts of the administrative state dismantled. I'm absolutely, I mean, those were the best days so far of this
right,
administration. Okay. Getting
right,
Radio Free Europe, gone. Okay. USAID, gone. I mean, I like that kind of stuff a lot.
right,
Okay. But
right. Yeah,
the immigration issue that catapulted Trump back into the White House, that is the issue, okay?
that is
Because
that is,
it's connected with the economy, it's connected with crime, at least is how they constructed their argument. Now it's being put to the test, okay?
right.
I am not surprised by any of this at all. And, in the time that I lived there, illegal immigration was an issue even when I was there. Okay. And the disrepair in the state is it's just abominable. I mean, it's the richest state in the union, has the richest people per zip code and all that. And someone pointed out about potholes. Yeah. Yeah. A lot of potholes. Okay.
Well,
So
that's the thing. I mean,
you just have a super rich, you have a dwindling middle class, and you have a poor underclass. Okay, and it's all by design.
right? No, that's right. Now, California is very interesting because it's I can't remember the exact numbers. I think it's at least doubled. The population's at least doubled in the last, I think, 30, 40
Oh
years.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So the infrastructure has remained more or less the same. So suddenly you've got twice the population using the same level of
Who in
infrastructure.
Los Angeles is proud of the airport? Who?
Yeah, yeah,
It's awful.
right. Yeah. It really is.
You feel like what? Are we in Caracas?
Yeah. But the thing is that if it does, the riots spread. Now the riots will all take place in democratic states. I mean, you can say where will they spread to? Well, New York, that's obviously a possibility. Chicago, that's Illinois. Um, so in each case, Trump would then have to do the federalizing the National Guard because because they are the governors would not, and they're not going to bring on the National Guard themselves. That's they're basically they're not going to do it. They say, well, everything's under control, everything's cool, and basically do nothing, and say, hey, this is Trump's doing, this is Trump's fault, and so therefore they'll do
Well,
nothing.
I mean, really,
In 2020, hey, it's Trump's fault, but they were the ones who were tasked with enforcing the law, and they didn't do it.
well, what it's going to get down to, okay, we have all the coloring out there. We have, the visuals of the shutting down of freeways, burning cars, the rubber bullets, the gas, and all of that. Okay, that's all for, that's for the canvas for all of us to watch. What's really going to matter, George, at the end of the day, you mentioned the states, is will ICE be able to do its job? That is
Right.
what it's down to.
Well, I
Okay,
think,
it's not going to be. It's not going to be, unfortunately, rubber bullets and water cannon. It's going to be, we're from ICE,
right.
move aside.
Well, that's it, and that's what Trump did. That's why Trump did not invoke the Insurrection Act, because if he had invoked the Insurrection Act, then essentially you can send in the National Guard to do law enforcement. So he hasn't done that. He hasn't said. All he's done is said that the National Guard is there to protect federal agents doing their job. So they're not actually in the business of law enforcement, as they would be if it was if you'd invoked the Insurrection Act. So when George H.W. Bush, the older Bush, he invoked the Insurrection Act after the Rodney King riots, and that meant that the National Guard actually was involved in day-to-day law enforcement.
I was there. I remember.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I remember it very well. Um, um, but I mean, there at least there was an agreement between Pete Wilson, Governor Pete Wilson, and George H.W. Bush. I mean, they were both Republicans, and they were in agreement. Yeah, essentially. But you have to invoke the Insurrection Act because that overturns the Posse Comitatus Act. The Posse Comitatus says that you can't use federal armed forces for basically law enforcement, but you can if you invoke the Insurrection Act. And so that's why that's the trick. But Trump hasn't gone there yet. He hasn't invoked the Insurrection Act. He's just saying that it's a limited operation to
What do you
protect
bet that
federal
Stephen
agents.
is writing little notes and slipping it under his door?
Right? Yeah,
It's time. Because I really think Stephen Miller is the gray cardinal of this administration.
I think he is definitely he's the brains of the operation. Another one who's the brains of the operation is Russ Vought. You don't hear much about him. He's the kind of that kind of a nerdy guy who runs the Office of Management and Budget. But he's a serious that's a big job. He did that in the first term, but he's a serious person. So I think he's another one who I think is providing the ideas. But I think Miller is the one who's always feeding.
Well, it's interesting. I saw Homan, the guy that's he actually calls himself the immigration czar. I was kind of surprised by as the immigration czar. I've never heard someone refer to himself as that. Okay, and he metaphorically, everyone, he is taking no prisoners.
Right.
This guy is the real deal. Okay,
right.
No ifs, no buts.
Right.
I saw him in a recording of a press conference he did, and I think it would be helpful for his case if he would come out with a big bulletin board and say, these are the people we arrested for this reason. Let's go through the list, everybody, because he said, we got rapists, we got murderers, we got, I'll take your word for it, okay? Right. But maybe you could say, this. I'm not going to use any names because I'll get in trouble. But name, offense, maybe country of origin. That would be helpful, okay?
Right.
And you could check it. You could say, well, let's see if that's true. That would make his case. Just not take my word for it, because this is where we're getting right now. Where this
Right.
is where two
Right.
interpretations are colliding.
Right.
And again, watching the footage. I mean, I'm not an expert on crowd control. I don't
Right.
know if the police are winning or losing. I
Right.
just see a lot of chaos. Okay.
Right.
But if you would come down to something that, because George and I are print guys, we like to read words,
Right.
okay, to
Right.
verify them and not
Right.
just be captured by emotion, which
Right.
this is what it's getting down to.
Right. No, that's right. Um, but it's obvious that any attempt on the part of the Trump administration to enforce immigration law, and that means deportations. I mean, we knew this ahead of time. The deportation. You can close down the border, which isn't going to be that easy, but nonetheless, they've succeeded in doing that. But that the deportation, there is going to be an absolute uprising. First of all, and we had that with the judges, but if that doesn't work, then essentially, because after all, if you're eligible for deportation, you're eligible for deportation. But then there'll be riots, and there's something similar is happening in Europe, and this is really the problem with the whole kind of immigration paradigm is that it's easy to get in, but it's really awfully hard to get somebody out.
Once
It's like,
once you step foot in,
right,
oh,
yeah. So,
well, I
um,
mean, like, this flagrant, fraudulent interpretation of asylum. Well,
yeah,
no, if you want asylum, you go to the closest country
yeah,
next to you, and then
exactly.
no, that has been completely ignored.
That's
Okay,
right. Exactly. That's
no,
exactly it.
all of this was by design. All of this was by design. And again, I will repeat, because I don't want to be misunderstood, is that the left, the liberals, they are flat on their back. I mean, you can disagree with a lot with what Trump is doing, but you're not looking for what does the other side think? No one's going. No one's going there. No one's going there. And now
No,
they're
no, no.
raising their flag on this one because they know that this is an issue that catapulted Trump back into power, and so they're going to go head to head with him. We started to see it. We're going to
Right.
see. And George is absolutely right. And if it spreads, it's not by accident. Everyone, you
Right.
think BLM was by accident?
No,
It
no,
was
no, no.
extremely well coordinated.
Extremely well coordinated, and that's the thing. That's the design of the color revolution. The color revolution is there to show that the chief really isn't in control of anything. They're basically he's unable to enforce the laws. Well, if he's unable to enforce the laws, if he's unable to um, execute the basic tasks he's been entrusted with, then what's the use of having him? He needs to be replaced. That's how you get rid of Yanukovych. That's how you get rid of Milosevic. That's how you get rid of Shevardnadze. It's a tried and true ploy, and they did that with Trump. And Trump was weak in 2020. He was caught by surprise. He shouldn't have been, but he was caught by surprise, and he didn't respond. In fact, he could have federalized the National Guard. He didn't, and then hey, it's on him. It's your problem. Just like with Lyndon Johnson, the riots in the cities were all blamed on him. In 1968, all the riots were his fault. Even though he could say, yeah, but I'm the head of the federal government. It's got nothing to do with me. What's going on in Memphis, Tennessee? Hey,
And
you're the
and
president.
tens of millions of Americans, and my father included, where is Dick Nixon?
Right. That's right. Exactly. And Nixon played the law and order card, even though people knew, yeah, but it's not the federal government's responsibility. Law and order
Well,
isn't what he does.
whatever, George.
I know it's whatever. You're absolutely right. Whatever. But Nixon did. Yeah, he talked about law and order, even though these were all local crime enforcement that was failing. So something similar is being tried with Trump. And if Trump is seen to have failed, then the Democrats will be back in. You said that they're flat on their backs. Yes, they're flat on their backs. But all they have to do, and that's their calculation, is that if Trump is seen to have failed, we will be back. Yeah, that's the cycle of politics. We don't have to do anything. We don't have to say anything positive or do anything positive. if the guy in charge fails, we're back in power.
And those Senate Republicans, I'm sure they're just in their lazy boy chairs, leaning back, watching Trump scramble. That's exactly
Right.
what they want. It's exactly
Right.
what they want.
That's right.
He's gonna get no help from those folks.
No,
No way.
no, and that's why I think it's very um, it's it's very important, I think, for Trump not to back down. Because of what happened in 2020. Now the interesting thing is this guy, this the Maryland man, this this Abrego Garcia,
Garcia. Yeah.
who's now been brought back. But the problem that he's been brought back is that he's now facing quite serious charges. I've got this. Let's take a look at what.
Well, this is what I wanted. This is
Yeah,
what I
but these are a lot more serious than
This is
before.
what
So
I wanted. If he's found guilty, he's looking at a lot of time.
that's
Okay,
right.
he might end up back in El Salvador.
That's right. Here's he's going to be doing some decades here. But I mean, he is being is this Kilmar Garcia? That's the indictment, and they say he's a member, this gang member. So he was, he's engaged in all these quite serious crimes. Transporting people, as um, and so essentially, as it goes into considerable detail in this indictment, these are really very serious crimes. So Garcia may be considering that I might have been better off staying in El Salvador and insisting on coming back.
We've been over this terrain many times already, but due process, okay? And this was turned into a flagship issue. Bring him back if he goes on. If they prove his case, he sees he's going to get a lot of time. Okay, that's called justice. Now, I have agreed with George, and I don't have a solution. I'm sorry, everyone. Okay, a hearing is not a trial, but even having a hearing, it could well go into the next century for the number
Right.
of people.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
I don't have the answer. Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, but there has to be proportion here, and I unfortunately don't have an answer. And I'll go back to when we talked about this for the very first time. This was a political gambit in the making, and we're off to the races, everyone.
Right. Right.
Look, ICE has been picking up people for months. Okay, then all of a sudden, at one Home Depot in Los Angeles, the spark starts the fire. Really, that's how the world works? No, it doesn't.
No. Well, yeah, exactly. All very well organized, very well orchestrated, and as I say, I think the calculation is Trump will back down. That once people see this daily riots, burning cars.
George, I'm not sure. I'm not sure I agree with you.
I'm not sure. No, I'm absolutely not sure. I'm not saying this will happen. I think that's
I
the
think
calculation.
that Stephen Miller or people like that saying this is what we've been waiting for.
Yeah, okay. No, I absolutely agree.
You
would hope. Yeah,
and Newsom, that incorrigible loser in California. What an obnoxious man. Okay?
New scum.
What they want to do is they want to fix his wagon where he'll never think about running for president.
Right.
This is the difference is that I tend to think that the people around Trump, they're far more better prepared for this than dealing with you.
So
okay.
Yeah. Right. I think so too. Now this woman Karen Bass, she was I think she was a director of a National Endowment for Democracy for a number of years. She had some kind of a senior position at the National Endowment for Democracy. But the interesting thing about the National Endowment for Democracy, because Trump basically cut off all funding for the NED, and then the court stepped in, but it's not really his fault. I mean, the court stepped in and said, "Hey, this money was appropriated by the Biden administration. They're entitled to their money." So the money basically the money continued to flow, but to be fair to Trump, there have been no new appropriations, and it doesn't look to me like Trump is going to do any more appropriating for the National Endowment for
Well, what is
Democracy or
it?
USAID.
Last time I heard, Radio Free Europe, the Europeans want to pick up the tab for that for the time being.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
that's what I heard as well. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
they don't have they have so much money. They their own populations are in want of nothing, so they're going to support an American propaganda machine.
right,
Um,
right, yeah, yeah.
I don't think Trump's going to back down. Okay,
No, I don't
I
think
mean,
so.
Newsom in this Karen, she's just I mean,
Horrible.
look up incompetence in the Encyclopedia Britannica. Her picture, she's just about incompetence. She is.
Yeah,
But during the fire, she was traveling. Yeah.
that's right. She was in Ghana. I think the inauguration of the new Ghanaian president. That she was
Very
there.
high priority for
High
Californians.
priority, but she's part of this whole international nexus. I mean, you don't just show up as a how does that come about that a mayor of Los Angeles is a guest of honor at the inauguration of a Ghanaian president? Well, she's part of that international infrastructure. A lot of people are on that
And
great,
you're not invited, George.
and I wasn't invited exactly. And she's there, and this horrific fire. I mean, it's just mind-boggling. And she didn't want to go back, like do her job. I mean, it's like, hey, you've got a job.
You
This
saw
is
her at the airport, remember?
what was
There was
that?
big Sky News cornered her.
Yeah,
at the
yeah,
airport.
that's right. Yeah, yeah,
She
yeah.
tried to escape, but the door was locked. It kind of prophetic. The door
Yes, it
is
was. It was. But it's a reflection. I think the New Scum and Karen Bass, they don't really care very much about their own people. They're interested in money. They're interested in power. But the big drawback for them is that they really don't give a damn about their populace, and that's why I have my doubts that Newscomb has much of a political future. I mean, he's going to run in 2028, but I don't see it. I think what happened, the fires. I mean, that's going to be on him. This is going to be on him. So I don't see he wins a national election.
even just for political shorthand, even though the winds have been taken out of the woke movement, it hasn't been taken out of the Democratic Party.
No.
I mean, did you see when they were, what's that? David Hogg is his name?
Oh, yeah, that kid, yeah.
And so when he was running, I think it's going to be taken away from him. He became vice chair of the DNC. Did you see that video of the voting regulations? Did you see it?
No.
It's incomprehensible. I mean, even the person that was explaining the rules, I don't think he understood it. Okay, and so that's still the Democratic Party. I mean, maybe a lot of liberals are disgusted with the Democratic Party, but the Democratic Party doesn't know how to shift gears. So Newsom doesn't have a snowball's chance in hell. The way the party is conformed today. So
Yeah.
Machine politics. It's all lobbyists and things like that. Okay, it's
Yes.
and the problem is it's all for one party. I mean, there's not like
Yes.
much competition.
Yes, I wouldn't be surprised if Kamala Harris doesn't make a serious run for the nomination in 2028.
I think she could even win in California.
I think she could, because there's no obvious candidate, to take her on. I mean, because who are the heavyweights in the party now? I mean, obviously, Newscomb. There's the guy, that fat guy very rich fat guy in Illinois. Pritzker, very, very rich, but very unattractive. Otherwise you have these rather unimpressive Democratic senators. I thought Fetterman might be a candidate, but that was before the latest revelations of just how badly, how far he's gone. And I thought maybe he's got better, his health has improved, but no, that hasn't happened. So forget about that. So
the Senate truant officer has to, go
Right.
after He doesn't even want to go to work now. So they let him walk around in his pajamas and the Senate well, and now he doesn't even want to go to work. And he's probably cloaked in an Israeli flag in bed.
That's right. Yeah, no, I yes, Senator Truman Thomas doesn't want to show up for work. um, so it's not,
Well, no, AOC. That's what she's the default position now. Yeah.
yeah. I think she's going to run. I mean, I think she's going to
I
run.
don't think she's run, but it's not inconceivable that she
Oh,
would.
I agree. I'm not sure whether she'll win. I think she will run. I think she has a national profile. She's attractive. I mean, there is a constituency that is enthusiastic, excited about her, just like Hillary Clinton. There was a constituency, a limited constituency that was excited about her. So if she runs, and she will probably get the backing of all the, whatever's left of the Bernie Sanders wing of the party. They're going to throw their weight behind her. I think it'll be a serious, she'll make a serious run. I don't know if she's going to win it, but I think
It has everything to do with how people feel about the then outgoing Trump administration. I
Yeah.
think that's. It's like she has no intrinsic qualities whatsoever, even other than this Instagram thing she can pull off, but
Right.
she has no other intrinsic value. Okay, so we're way, we can, in a great American political tradition, we can talk about it after the midterms. Okay.
Well, exactly. No, that's right. But always keep in mind, always very, very important. The key constituency within the Democratic Party today is young-ish single women. That's the key. That's the key.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah,
They will go for her.
young, single, miserable women. You didn't finish.
Yeah.
it.
Okay. Young. Okay. Yeah. That's the key. They're the ones who will show up
And yell at you.
and yell at you. Because when you looked at the polls, I can't remember offhand the numbers. Trump did well in most voting groups. He did well, with the exception of one group. He really did badly, and that was with those young single women. Did catastrophically there, and that's the core of the Democratic Party. They're going to go for AOC. So that's her calling card. Now to switch gears, really switch gears. There was an article in Politico the other day lamenting, weeping. The very tragic event, which is that Russian cultural figures are making a comeback. After the glory days of February and March of 2022, when famous Russian artists were banished from orchestras, from opera houses. It was a fantastic time. And now, slowly but surely, they're creeping back in. So let me just show you this article from Politico, and it just to give you a flavor of the tone of it. Here's even from the headline: Russia's blacklisted classical music stars make a comeback in Europe.
You have to really think. The editor. Somebody told the editor that. Did you hear that this guy's back at the Berlin Philharmonic? What? Well, let's get a story. That's outrageous. Outrageous. Let's get a story. Get on it right now. I mean, my point is that somebody found something out and said, oh my goodness, we have to alert the world that this tragic cultural denigration of the West. I mean, they're writing it because they're angry. They're not writing it because they want to inform.
Right. Exactly. So here, note the subhead: Vladimir Putin's musical darlings are back in the spotlight, and Ukraine and the EU are not pleased.
Okay.
Why do I care whether Ukraine and the EU are pleased or not? I mean, is that something I need to worry about?
So von der Leyen has some kind of um, uh, culture department demanding hygiene. Okay.
That's right. And here's this: even as Russia's armies invaded Europe over the past century. When did Russia's armies invade Europe over the past century? I mean, that kind of fascinating that this is Politico, owned by Axel Springer Verlag. And so this is as Russia's armies invaded Europe over the past century. Its music spilled through the continent's theaters and concert halls, with impassioned conductors and glamorous sopranos becoming the leading ambassadors of Russia's cultural might. When the Soviet Union fell, Russia's operas and ballet still held a hallowed place in Europe, so too after Moscow annexed Crimea in 2014. But that all came to a screeching halt in the winter of 2022 when the Kremlin launched its full scale invasion of Ukraine. And then he goes on, in a show of solidarity with Kiev, the classical music world canceled Russian concerts, stopped performing seminal works like The Nutcracker and Swan Lake, and dropped performers with public ties to President Vladimir Putin. All part of the broader de-Russification of the European arts.
I've never come across that de-Russification of European art. Okay, well, that's assuming Russian art.
There is such a thing as the Russification
Yeah,
of
I
the
mean,
European. I mean, I guess it means basically they mean de-Russification is just get rid of all traces of Russian culture. I mean, just
hygiene,
I mean,
hygiene. We need hygiene.
hygiene. Take the books off the damn library shelves. Cancel all your musical concerts involving Russian composers, and so we don't get to hear any of that. I mean, that's the plan. 3 years later, however, some of Russia's biggest stars are quietly, notice the use of quietly, returning to orchestras and stages across Europe. That's a victory for Moscow. Just
Well,
as
I mean, look at that sentence. 3 years later, however, some of Russia's biggest stars are quietly returning to orchestras and stages. I mean, you get the impression that they went up to the door and they opened it and they just kind of walked in. I mean, were they invited in with very
well, that's
lucrative?
the thing, and that's what it emerges from this article. They were invited. I mean, the people invite them because they are outstanding artists. So, I mean, the idea they quietly, surreptitiously.
Just as an aside, and George is going to mention some of the names and all that. In the center of Moscow, they have a wonderful philharmonic, actually a number of them, and you can see the highest quality Russian musical legacy for $5 a pop. $5, and that's a good seat.
Right.
And it doesn't get any better. I mean, they're playing their own cultural tradition, okay,
Right.
but you can get it for $5, and
Right.
the last 5-6 times I've been there, it's been packed.
Right.
One thing that's really gratifying is a lot of young people. Okay,
Right.
so that tradition is very much alive here, and it's very affordable. The places George is going to mention, they ain't cheap. Those ain't cheap seats.
No,
Sorry,
no, no, you're absolutely right. But of course, what I should say before I go further, which is, it's always interesting that they make these demands only when it comes to Russian culture. I mean, it's not like when at the time of the Iraq invasion, someone said, "Well, I'm outraged by what the United States has done. Let's cancel all the
cancel
American
Disneyland."
I don't want any stinking American conductors conducting Beethoven in my orchestra. I don't want any American sopranos and mezzo sopranos in my opera house. Nobody does it. Nobody, and rightly. I mean, you don't blame the actions of a government on artists. I mean, these are the most outstanding artists in the world. What do they spend their time doing? They spend their time on their art. I mean, to get to be that good, to be among the best in the world, you have to do this all the time. I mean, you don't take a couple of days off. You'd have to do it all the time to be that good. The whole idea of blaming them for the actions of their government was always ridiculous. But they do it in order to embarrass them. But it only applies to Russians.
Well, there was a recent case. There was an amazingly gifted Georgian woman with her renditions of Rachmaninoff, which I have behind me. It's just absolutely exquisite. Because she was a Georgian citizen, but she was playing Russian music,
Yeah.
and she had her contracts canceled.
Yeah. 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 They did that with the athletes initially. The problem why that failed almost immediately is there's so much money in sport. You can't mess around with sport too much, because hey, you're talking about millions and millions of bucks, and if the best in the world are not in attendance, they're going to lose a lot of money. And that's why
Well, you
when they
degrade
tried
the
to
sport,
ban, yeah,
and you degrade the sport.
yes, exactly. So that's why when they tried to, ban, a few Russian tennis players, that fell flat on their face almost immediately. And the British, the only ones who actually did that, were slapped down and were fined for banning Russian tennis stars from Wimbledon. So you don't do that because there's just so much money in it. But they can do it here because it's just weedy opera people. Who cares about that? It's just elderly people. They don't matter. Um, anyway, just go on with this ridiculous article. Um, and So here, I like this. There's a victory for Moscow. We've won. We got.
Well,
And yet,
maybe it's a victory for art.
exactly. And just as critics say, it is hoping to end its global isolation using Russian high art and culture as a weapon of soft power. And then it says, facing the Russian returnees, Ukraine and the EU are both calling for the continent's prestigious opera houses and theater companies to hold the line against Moscow. Ukrainian Culture Minister Mykola Tochitsky said Europe's art scene should think twice before welcoming Russian performers back into the fold, calling it a very risky to reintegrate Russian culture while Moscow's full-scale invasion
How is it
grinds on.
risky? What is the
Yeah,
risk?
exactly. Yeah. It's very interesting. It's not. He doesn't really explain. There's an implication there that these Russian artists may be involved in some kind of terrorism, because otherwise, I don't get what's the risky part of it. When you have a Russian active cultural action in your country, it's immediately about disinformation and about preparing some kind of act of aggression.
Is the Nutcracker suite transmitting secret directives from the
I think
Kremlin?
so. Yes, from the Nutcracker. Yeah. This, and then European Culture Commissioner. How does one get to be a culture commissioner? I want to be a culture commissioner. Glenn Mikalev concurred, telling Politico European stages should not be giving any space to those who are supporting this war of aggression against
Well,
Ukraine.
but listening to the Nutcracker suite, does that mean you support war?
Yeah, it must be to those who are supporting this war. Well, I guess they feel that almost any Russian artist is supporting this war just by definition.
Well, they might or
Um,
may. We don't know unless
they
they
might
tell
or they
us.
might not, and what does it matter? It's like, but see, again, it's always they're always trying to do this with the Russian artists. Was that, hey, what's your position on this? What do you think? They did that with that tennis, the Belarusian tennis player. She's the number one in the world, the Sabalenka. Every time there's a news conference, they would ask her about Lukashenko. And then until she finally said, I'm not going to ask you, you want to ask me about tennis? I'll answer your questions about tennis. I'm not going to answer your questions about Lukashenko. But that's all they would ask her. Well, what do you think of
Well, I
Lukashenko?
mean, was any American athlete asked about George Bush's illegal invasion of
No,
Iraq? Were they ever asked?
never. No. I mean, but exactly. So it's always, they do this. It's a way of bullying. I mean, it's always they're putting them on the defensive. And so, oh well, I don't really want to talk about that. They say, oh, she refused to condemn Lukashenko. Can we ban her, please, because she refused to condemn Lukashenko? So what I forgot is that they used to do this kind of thing during the Cold War when which I'd forgotten. I just read this somewhere that they would ask Shostakovich. There'd be some kind of an international conference. Shostakovich was allowed to leave the country to go to some international conferences, and they would ask him immediately about Stalin. It was such a ridiculous thing. I mean, he's not going to start talking about Stalin in general. But he's certainly not going to talk about Stalin when he's abroad. So he would sort of,
We talk about the lack of understanding. You trying to get me killed?
Exactly. So, well, he's very wise. He has a very strong musical taste. He understands.
What do you want me to say?
Musical. Upon which they would listen to this. Shostakovich is a musical hack. Because he was telling us, that Stalin's wisdom and understanding of music is second to none. He's a typical Stalinist hack. Anyway, so the where are we? Yes. And then he goes, and then he goes into this history. In 2008, Valery Gergiev, one of Russia's most famous conductors, held a propaganda concert in the ruined city of Chikanvili.
It was not a propaganda concert. I watched that live. I was in the studio, but I watched it live. It was absolutely exquisite.
Exactly. And here I actually looked at this story in The Guardian about that concert. This was written at the time. South Ossetians enjoy requiem concert in shattered capital. Russian conductor Valery Gergiev plays Shostakovich's stirringly patriotic Leningrad Symphony. And against the wrecked backdrop of the Parliament building, the Russian conductor Valery Gergiev held a requiem concert. Gergiev, principal conductor of the London Symphony Orchestra, played Shostakovich's Seventh and Tchaikovsky's Sixth. Gergiev, who comes from North Ossetia, flew into South Ossetia from the Edinburgh Festival, having spoken passionately about compatriots who died in Georgia's attack on the city on August the 7th and 8th.
An interesting side note to that concert, which surprised a lot of people. It was amazingly well choreographed, considering what had just happened with the invasion, Saakashvili's invasion of South Ossetia. Is that when he took what do you call the lantern? What do you call that when they stand in front of the
lectern?
Right.
Lectern, yeah.
He started out in Russian, then he interrupted himself, then he said it in English, then he continued in Russian, then he interrupted himself and he said it in English, because he wanted the whole world to experience it and not to be just to the Russian language. It surprised a lot of people. Okay, and he was very passionate, extremely passionate about it.
Right. Though you're right, but you see, what was interesting is that I'm just reading this story from The Guardian, and that's The Guardian. That's
that's a rag. Yeah,
that's a rag, exactly. And so this whole the Politico says, it's a propaganda concert. Let me just go back to that.
Well, George, it's not as if these performers are, I'm not aware of that they're complaining, why won't you have us back? I think it's the other way around. They're being courted to come back.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. And then here, this is just the Guardian says the audience waved Russian Ossetian flags in time to the music, while Russian television screened the event in full live. Earlier, Gergiev told the BBC Russian service that the war in Georgia was a great tragedy and accused Saakashvili of wanting to destroy all of South Ossetia. Um, and then it says, this is going back to the Politico article. After Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, that's Gergiev, he was dropped by his management and dumped by various orchestras and theaters from Milan and Munich to Rotterdam and Vienna. He has conducted concerts in China and Iran, but is sanctioned by Ukraine and has not stepped foot in Europe since the all-out assault began. And then here's the dramatic kicker. This is about to change. Oh no. And Gergiev is set to perform a handful of shows in Barcelona next year with Russia's Mariinsky Orchestra as part of the Ibercameral concert series, which lists the EU's Next Generation Fund as a financial supporter. The event's organizer told Spanish outlet El País there was no legal impediment to Gergiev participating and said he hoped music would be a bridge to unite, not to war. And then, but the
idea. A unique idea, yeah.
Yes, yes, exactly. It's kind of what artists have always said throughout the ages, but the EU isn't buying it. And the Commission initiated talks with the Spanish authorities. I mean, this is the European Commission initiated talks with the Spanish authorities to verify that no EU funds have been used to stage performances involving the pro-Putin Russian maestro, according to a Commission official speaking on background to discuss the dialogue. Asked about its EU funding, a spokesperson for the festival told Politico its concerts had never been subsidized by the European Union, but conceded it had sought an arts grant from the Next Generation EU Fund, and then the bloc's flagship pandemic recovery package. But you can see where this is going. I mean, the EU is just going to keep badgering them and find some way. Hey, you've got some money. You got some money from the EU. Therefore, we're going to make sure that you can never get another penny from the EU in any way, shape, or form unless you cancel Gergiev. It's the amazing thing is just the barbarity of the EU. I mean, we're talking about serious barbarity. You never had this kind of thing during the Cold War, because even during the Cold War, you always had the Bolshoi. They'd always come and perform.
That was my first. I must have been like 10, 11 years old. And it was my family at the time was living in a suburb of Denver, Colorado, and the Krasnodar ballet troupe came through, and that was first of all, I'd never seen a live dancing event in my life. Okay, and no American dancing or anything like that, and we were taken to Denver to the concert hall, and we were all like 10, 11, 12 years old, and we're just like, wow, that's amazing. Okay, I mean, it was a part of this cultural exchange, and it's the only time when I lived in America that I actually saw something like that. Okay, right. Because when I was growing up, it was no one thought about it, when no one was encouraged to. It was really eye-opening. I mean, it was my first contact with Russians and then the Soviet Union.
Yeah, no, that's right. And the same with all the the Russian stars, all the ice skaters and everything else. So people were always amazed at their extraordinary skills. This is something else of this absolute barbarity.
Well, it's petty too. It's pathetically petty.
Right.
I mean, presumably people will want to go there. I mean, what's wrong with these people? Are you going to go that far? You went to this concert? I mean, really, where does this end?
Right. but that's it. But up until now, the people have always been able to distinguish artists from the governments. I mean, Herbert von Karajan, it was hailed as one of the greatest conductors of all time. They say, well, yeah, but what about Hitler? And no, I mean, he was a great conductor, and you always were able to differentiate art from politics. Not so the EU. Not in the same. And again, it's always one sided. I mean, Putin has said this. Hey, we don't go around saying we're not going to play Bach anymore because we don't like Germans. I mean, we may not like Germans, but we're still going to play Bach.
We still like Bach, though. It's so strange that that's just something that I don't come across at all any kind of cultural antipathy towards any culture at all.
Right.
It's so strange.
It is. I mean, you're right. It is petty, and it's done with a view to humiliating individual artists. Just saying, hey, we're going to make life really, really unpleasant for you unless you play ball with us.
Right.
We're going to have the humiliation.
Tony Soprano would really understand this one.
That's right. Yes. And again, the Mikhailov, the EU's culture chief, said that even if a performance is entirely privately funded, that should not stop us from making very strong political statements about the fact that we should not offer any space for those who are supporting these wars of aggression.
Said like a pure Bolshevik.
It is like a Bolshevik. We have to work stronger and harder with our member states to make sure this doesn't happen. And I think I was trying to find it where it said about Netrebko.
Oh, go back. I like that phrase. Go back.
Which one?
What's
mental
that?
quarantine. Oh, yes. The early days of Moscow's invasion saw a broader Western rejection of Russian culture and artistic figures allegedly in league with the Kremlin. Something Lithuania's culture minister, who'd have thought that there was such a Lithuania's culture minister?
It's Landsbergis, a family.
Another one of the Landsbergises, yes, a mental quarantine. Lavrenchuk said it was troubling that this resolve was now apparently wavering. So we have to have this mental quarantine. We have to quarantine ourselves mentally. I love that. That's a great phrase, mental quarantine.
On quarantining itself. It just quarantine.
That's right. We need a vaccine against Russian culture. Today, we cannot stand on the same stage with Russians, regardless of the context, because other people will use it to legitimize the friendship of Ukrainian and Russian peoples, he said. One will say that politicians are fighting somewhere else, but the ordinary people are Slavic brothers. This cannot be allowed. And this is today we cannot stand.
You can just see the saliva just accumulating, as hyperventilating, and his eyes are popping out. Okay.
I really do think that these Baltic states, something needs to be done about them, because these are like rabid dogs. You always have to think at some point you're going to have to do something about. I mean, yeah, we talk about Chihuahuas, but if they're rabid, you have to address the problem of rabies. I mean, because that's dangerous. I mean, these Baltic, these are dangerous. I mean, they are just foaming at the mouth, stick their teeth into something.
But I'm sure you're like myself. I just long ago it's just water off the back of a duck. I just don't. Okay. Freedom of speech, I'm for it. Go ahead. You have a right to say it. Great. Okay.
Right, but they have an effect. They're part of this EU.
NATO. We've gone through this. I mean, they're like the front man. They want to grab the flag and lead the parade, even though they're the weakest link, and add nothing to the equation at all.
Yeah, that's right. Anyway, let's go to our locals page and address the questions of our locals supporters. These are the people who are keeping the dogs fed. Otherwise, the dogs will be going hungry and thirsty. But they're keeping the dogs in good clover. Anyway, Stone River. Thank you very much, Stone River. Really appreciate it. So Stone River says, if one were to accept the following three premises: Russia is fighting a proxy war against NATO. Okay, NATO all up has conventional military supremacy over Russia. The mad nuclear doctrine is now moot. Does that imply that NATO will eventually prevail and ultimately succeed in breaking up the Russian Federation? Okay, you want to take that, Peter?
Well, that's kind of all three are the flip side of what George and I have been saying for ever since we started the podcast. Russia is not fighting a proxy war against NATO. NATO is fighting a proxy war against Russia using Ukraine. It's not the other way around. Russia doesn't want a conflict with NATO. It has never sought one, and it's been provoked repeatedly, particularly last weekend, and it still hasn't. Okay, so it's a proxy war in reverse. What is go back to the third point on MAD? Because I think it
Well,
is
the mad doctrine is moot. Now, I think what we were talking about, why the mad doctrine is moot, is that
well, both sides have to believe in it. Okay,
right, exactly. The point was that, given that the assumption on the mad was that the moment we start down up the escalatory ladder, it's irreversible, and both sides have the capability of destroying one another. That neither side can hope to prevail in a nuclear war. Once you do that and say, okay, the escalatory ladder is irreversible, and both sides will be destroyed, then essentially, okay, well, I mean, neither side messes with the other. Now, that I think is moot, because ultimately what NATO has done is been provocative, and they're saying, yeah, that's fine, but how do we know that the Russians are really going to go in and try to use nuclear weapons? They're not going to do it, because if you use nuclear weapons, then that is suicidal. And since being suicidal is irrational, and Russians are not irrational, therefore they're not going to go down the nuclear path. That was the thing with MAD. MAD was the assumption there was, yeah, both sides are ready to go nuclear. And now essentially the West has thrown that in the dustbin by saying, we don't really believe Russia's going to go down the nuclear path. Therefore, we can go on being as provocative as we want.
Now, well, but the thing is that technology is always advancing here, and we have these new weapon systems which will have essentially the impact, the effect of a nuclear weapon. So, and plus, you have to keep in mind, everyone, it's not a nuclear strike against NATO or a NATO country, but what is the reaction going to be if the nuclear option is used against Ukraine? What is the reason for the U.S. or the French or the British to react to that if it's against Ukraine and not NATO or their own country? I mean, at the very beginning of this, you both sides have to believe in it. If one side doesn't adhere to it, then we're in a very, very dangerous place, and that's where we.
That's right, and that's why.
Now.
That's right, and that's why this war in Ukraine hasn't ended. I mean, we assume that it would end in the way that they had ended in the past, which is that the West decided, well, we can't go around provoking the Russians, because, hey, that's they can go up the nuclear ladder, and we don't want to do that, so we're not going to provoke them. That was the decision taken by Eisenhower in 1956 over Hungary. It was the decision of Lyndon Johnson in 1968 over Czechoslovakia. It was the decision of Ronald Reagan. I think it's still Jimmy Carter there was Ronald Reagan with the martial law in Poland. And so, that was always the decision of U.S. presidents. Biden essentially dispensed with that and said, well, we can go on taking these risks. And that's why this has gone on and on and on.
Well, and
the West is still saying, we can go on taking these risks, and we're fighting it Russian soil.
And why it's truly a proxy war, because NATO is using Ukraine to attack Russia's nuclear triad. I mean,
Right,
you got to give them credit for their imagination. Okay,
right, right.
this is what makes. And I'm taking a much harder position. George said that these Baltic Chihuahuas have to go. This regime in Kiev has to go too. Okay,
Right. Yeah,
where we are.
that's right. So, yeah.
Okay, did he answer all three of them? Okay, because
Well, I think imply that NATO will eventually prevail. Well, we
um,
don't
I,
know how that's going to go. I mean, I think that this.
I doubt it very, very much.
I think
Okay,
it's going to be
I
it's
mean,
going to be
it's
hard.
one of the George and I commenting on the commentary. Okay, this will destroy NATO. NATO will be broken up. I'm not going to go that far. Okay,
No,
because
I don't think
even
it's
on
going
this
to go.
podcast, George and I have gone at great length explaining how NATO has many different operations: the
Right. Yeah.
Baltic,
Right.
the Black
Mm,
Sea.
right.
The high-profile meetings in
Right.
Azerbaijan. I mean, they're
Right.
they're taking a huge hit in Ukraine, but it doesn't mean their appetite to destroy Russia has changed
Right.
at all. This is
Right.
a generational project, everyone. It's just not since 2014. It's not since
Right.
2022.
Yeah. No, that's right. I think it's that's the NATO plan. And I mean, there's a number of steps along the way before we can get there. But NATO has indeed taken enormous risks, the kind of risks that probably few doubted that they would do. I mean, few doubted. I mean, I thought they would go all the way, but in 2022, I thought that they are going to take some risks. I didn't think they would take this many
Yeah,
risks.
but George, I mean, again, considering the drone attack on Russia's nuclear triad, it, that was something we've never seen before. Is that now going to become the norm, where we have
Could
this
be.
kind of asymmetrical? We have it,
Right.
and then George brought it up. In third countries. I mean,
Yeah. Okay.
the stench of potential defeat is only going to make them more aggressive. Okay,
Right.
that's what we
Right.
have to worry about. This is
Right.
whatever happens in Ukraine is not going to define NATO one way or another, but it may give impetus to different directions that they're already entertaining.
Right. And Vic Shakapopoulos says about the Volhynian massacres, while the hatred of Ukrainians towards Poles could be somehow understood after centuries of political subjugation and because of the class aspect of the conflict, I could never understand why would the Croats of that era have that level of hatred towards the Serbs. Any ideas? Well, I think that's a very good question because ultimately, really, as you say, I mean, they were really they didn't have that much to do with one another until the creation of the Kingdom of Yugoslavia. First, the Kingdom of Croats, Serbs, and Slovenes, and then there was the Kingdom of Yugoslavia. And the Croats felt that in the Kingdom of Yugoslavia, the Serbs were the dominant nation, and they were. I mean, after it was the king of Serbia became the king of Yugoslavia. However, the question of why that translated itself into this murderous rage, this murderous hatred towards the Serbs, I can't explain it because they really didn't have anything. The Croats were part of Hungary. They were part of the Kingdom of Hungary. The Serbs were a separate entity. They were ruled by the Ottomans, and then they were dominated by the Austrians, and then they became their own state. They didn't have that much to do with each other. So the reason for this Croatian hatred for the Serbs goes back to those 20 years of the Kingdom of Yugoslavia. And it's hard to see that anything was done to the Croats that could justify the murderous hatred of the Ustasha.
How are we doing on time, George?
We've got a couple of minutes. So DJ, Woof Woof, thank you very much for the your contribution. Really appreciate it. Well, I appreciate the dogs. I mean, I don't get anything. The dogs get all the money. And then the DJ says, "R.I.P. The Red Army choir members lost in that horrific Christmas season plane crash. I will never forget their performance video of happy. Okay, yeah, yeah, yes, yeah. No, that was that. Can't remember what year was that. Was it 2018 with that the crash when they were flying to Syria? Um,
Oh, something
uh,
like that. Yeah.
yeah, something. Yeah,
Actually, there have been a number of crashes like that over the years. Yeah.
right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's right. So I think we can conclude that the EU are a horrible, barbaric
Horrible people.
entity. Really, really, really horrible,
They have nothing better
evil.
to do, I guess.
That's right. Exactly. Exactly. It's yeah. And as is of course NATO. And just to conclude, remember when yesterday Mark Sloboda correctly said, well, a bridge, a railroad bridge, is a legitimate military target. It isn't a legitimate military target when a passenger train is on it. And if we had more time, I'd said, yeah, and that NATO is very good at that. They did that when they were bombing Serbia. They did exactly that. They hit a bridge. Oh, that's a legitimate military target. Yeah, but there was a passenger train, traveling across it, middle of the day, and you hit a bridge in the middle of the day. So, tried and true NATO operation. So, there's nothing to be said for NATO. Anyway, any closing thoughts, Peter?
I hope this will work out just as well next week.
Me too. All right. Thank you, everybody who joined us. Thank you for all your comments, questions, and observation. Above all, to those who put money into the dog's tip jar, the dogs will be happy to the extent they can be. So we will be back same time next week. All the best. Bye bye.